Having better climbing endurance means that you get to do more climbing, more hard climbs, more great climbs, whatever. But doing those hard or great climbs might also mean that you need more strength or more skill. Which is why I recently dropped a video that outlines 3 sessions that, when cycled through, are probably the simplest effective way to structure your training for climbing. Go hard, do more, and explore. And in that video, I kept the advice really simple because simple was the entire goal. I know that some people want a little more detail and understanding of how to take the next step to make those sessions more robust. So I'm going deeper into each session and looking at the specifics. I'm Chris Hampton, this is the Power Company Climbing Academy, and in this video, we're talking about some of the important considerations during a do more session. Let's go. So, the idea of this session is to improve the ability to do more climbing across the entire difficulty spectrum. For the newer climber, this might mean just doing a little more each session, stay on the wall longer, do more moves, have a slightly longer session, maybe even more sessions in a week. In its most simple form, this is any way you can manipulate the time spent or number of moves that you're doing at any specific difficulty. But as you gain experience and are climbing harder, this is going to mean being more intentional about the compromise you're making, because this is going to be a compromise. As the intensity of these sessions goes up, as you have to give a higher extensive effort, the session will be more fatiguing, which means the recovery will take longer. So you'll get fewer sessions. Depending on your goals and how near performance time we are, the value of that compromise will change. That is entirely up to you, and is really one of the best reasons to consult a coach, but we're going to go over some of the considerations here. But before we go further, let's take a look at the relationship between endurance and effort, because you can still give high effort in a do more session, and it can feel like you're trying just as hard as you do in a go hard session. The key is that it's a different type of effort. And I think defining this effort will help you better understand what fits into a do more session versus a go hard session, because the lines definitely blur. Now, this next clip is part of my Try Harder Toolkit, which is a 1-hour video series that dives into the science of creating, accessing, and managing effort levels. It's totally free, and the link will be there in the description. Many of us only consider effort when it's in terms of needing to try harder, and this is the Try Harder Toolkit. But we should also consider our effort when we need to try either softer or longer. And I believe that effort is best visualized, at least in part, as a dial. And this dial goes from intensive to extensive. Intensive being short efforts that require bursts of energy, and extensive being longer efforts that require more sustained energy. But there's still a component missing: the level of effort that you give during that short or long campaign. So I prefer to visualize effort as this dial, but also a fader that goes from 0 to 10, which represents the level of effort that you're giving, how hard or how soft you're trying. And exactly how this fader and dial work together is open for some interpretation. I prefer to think of the fader, the 1 to 10 level, as how much I'm giving to an individual move at that moment. So fatigue has to come in as a variable. A move that might be a 3 in isolation, when linked from the ground, might require a 6. So a really continuous resistant route might not have a single move harder than a 4, but as you near the top, may require that you push the fader closer and closer to 10. And the dial is similar in that neither are a set it and forget it situation. Let's say there's a 13A that has a 2-bolt V6 right off the ground and is followed by a 7-bolt continuous 11 plus, and finally a short V2 slab. If V6 or V7 is your max, then you're going to start with the dial all the way to the intensive side and the fader pushed up to 10. And then as soon as you reach the relatively stable position that marks the end of the hard climbing and the beginning of the 11 plus, you'll turn the dial closer to extensive and the fader down to 4 or 5. As you progress up the route, that fader goes higher and higher as you need to give more of your remaining effort to stay on the wall. If you successfully turn the lip onto the short V2 slab, you turn the dial back to intensive, but also bring the fader down, because too much effort is likely to cause you to slip off of the delicate slab moves. Now, the fact is, if you have the effort fader up to 10, you can't sustain that for very long. And if you have to push it there while fatigued, you can't do it many times. That's a recipe for failure. So part of this training is learning how to reduce the amount of effort to better match the number of moves or the time under tension that's required. And you can really only learn how to make those adjustments through intentional climbing. It's not going to happen with repeaters or BFR training or some other endurance hack. Now, this session can be done on ropes or boulders. You can mix it up depending on your goals. If you're doing it on a rope, you have to be careful not to just slip into a climbing session where you're doing a route, then belaying, then doing a route, and so on. Instead, make sure that your belayer understands that this session is going to be different and you're going to be pushing yourself to either be on the wall longer, to get pumped, to do more routes, or whatever the goal is. If you're doing it on boulders, consider the time that you're in the gym. If it's the busiest time of the day or week, it might become less simple. You can make it work, but you have to be aware of the challenges. In the previous video, the Go Hard video, I broke down how to structure that session. And if you want some advice on warming up and getting yourself ready to give real effort, then go watch that video. But here, for this video, I think we're going to be better off looking at the different types of do more and why you might choose one over the other. Now, endurance essentially exists on a slider that goes from low intensity, this is the aerobic system, the ability to stay on the wall for a long time, giving low effort and managing a low pump, to a higher middle intensity, the anaerobic system, which requires higher effort to manage an extreme pump. When talking about this, we tend toward the extremes, but in practice, we're actually sliding between the two and spending most of our time somewhere in the middle. So what we'll do here is look at some ways to work on each half of the slider. And chances are, because of the nature of climbing, you're going to be operating at various points on this slider, which is a good thing. There's just no evidence that going further to isolate one of these energy systems is beneficial for climbing performance. Number one, low intensity endurance and stamina. This is not about chasing a pump or fatigue. It's about doing a lot of moves below your anaerobic threshold, which is essentially the threshold above which you're getting more and more pumped as you go. Now, if you can do enough moves over time, bumping right against that threshold, but not crossing it, the threshold will raise. You'll get better at staying below it on harder and harder moves. And this ability and skill is massively underrated for sport climbers, and maybe even more so for boulders. And if you've ever fallen off of the easy climbing at the end of the boulder, this is what you need. Now, my preferred way to do these sessions is on boulders by spending 20 to 30 minutes doing continuous boulders that get me to a warm, mild pump and adjusting as I go so that I'm not gaining an unmanageable pump, but I'm also not just phoning it in on really easy terrain. And by continuous boulders, I don't mean that you have to stay on the wall for the entire time, though you can do that too, particularly if that's a skill you haven't developed. Instead, I usually drop off and walk to the next boulder, not resting between boulders, and then after 20 to 30 minutes of that, I rest 5 to 10 minutes and repeat for 3 to 4 sets or whatever your session allows. And this is what I recommend for most boulders or experienced sport climbers. However, if you're a relatively new sport climber, say up to mid 512, then you might want to do this on a rope, and you'll also be getting comfortable on lead, above bolts, managing a pump. Sometimes hang out at the rest stances, and other times try to keep continuously moving. Both are valid and will teach you different skills. Now, in that example, we're looking for on-the-wall endurance, and the intensity of the moves getting occasionally right up to that threshold is important. Now, these sessions can get really time-consuming, but when done well, don't require a massive recovery time. And you can come into them still feeling some fatigue, so they're a pretty good second day on. During these lower intensity sessions, if you're failing often or getting really pumped, you're probably shooting too high with the difficulty. If you feel no pump at all, probably too low. Finding the ideal zone can be challenging, but don't overthink it. If the pump is growing, back off. If there's none, step it up a little. It's really that Simple. Number 2, middle intensity. This is your classic power endurance or anaerobic endurance. Hard route or long boulder. You've crossed that anaerobic threshold and now the race is on. The pump is growing and you need to get to the end or to the easier terrain before it redlines. Or you're getting more and more power down and your movement skills and your big move precision are steadily declining. Improving this ability can take so many forms, but it's usually some sort of interval. Most common is the 4x4, 4 sets of 4 back-to-back boulders with rest between sets. But intervals are really easy to adjust to fit your goals, so don't stick to that 4x4 model. For instance, if you're strictly a boulderer, you might get more out of doing several sets of 2 difficult boulders back-to-back, or even with a little rest between the 2 boulders. If you're a Red River sport climber, you might get more out of doing sets of 5 easy to moderate boulders followed by 1 difficult boulder. Now, if you want to work in this middle intensity on a rope, particularly if it's going to help you learn to give more extensive effort above bolts, then you should absolutely do that. You might get the right stimulus just trying some mini project level routes. But if you want more control over it, here's a great way. You'll need to find a route that starts with a moderately difficult first few bolts, but then eases off for the top. And that might just be continuously easier climbing or a good rest, followed by something a little more challenging. What you're going to do is what I call crux intervals. You'll lead up the first few bolts of harder climbing. When you get to the end of the harder climbing, say take and lower back to the ground. Now top rope back to the highest clip. Lower off again, and repeat. How many times you do this is up to you, but the goal is to get sufficiently pumped or powered down, and then continue up the remainder of the route. This way, you're artificially creating the same sort of situation that a hard, pumpy route will put you in, and you have more control over the amount of pump, which means you can progress or regress as needed. Now, unlike the lower intensity sessions, these middle intensity sessions can be really taxing and can raise the recovery time dramatically. Because of that, people tend to skip them. But let's be clear about something. This type of endurance climbing is absolutely skillful. It's not just a physical property. You have endurance or you don't. You also have to know how to use the endurance, how to be efficient, how much you can get back at a rest, and maybe most important, how to believe that you can keep going when it feels like you can't. You can't learn those things or improve those skills without putting yourself into those scenarios. You could avoid them in the gym and wait for the projects, but I'd personally rather send my projects faster or get on harder projects, so I choose to work on and learn these things in the gym. That does mean you'll need more recovery time, which means fewer total sessions across a week or a month, and that compromise is up to you, but be careful not to dig yourself into a hole. Now, I guess the question is, how do you choose to do low intensity or middle intensity? That's up to you ultimately, but there are some things to keep in mind. If your overarching goal for the moment is to gain high intensity strength or power, you'll be rewarded for doing shorter, more frequent sessions by coming in more fresh for those sessions. Now, this is in direct conflict with that middle intensity, get pumped style of endurance training. And that's absolutely fine because that type of endurance is extremely transient. It comes and goes easily. Now, assuming you've already gotten fairly skilled at climbing in that style, then you can easily let go of it while focusing on strength, and a small amount of lower intensity endurance will hold you over. When it's getting close to performance time, you can spin up that middle intensity endurance with a handful of sessions. The more skilled you've become at that type of endurance, the more skilled you've become, the faster it will spin up and the quicker you'll be able to apply it. That said, if you're still pretty new to that style, if you're someone who regularly says take because you think you're going to fall off, which means you probably aren't spending enough time developing those skills, then it's pretty unlikely you'll ever be able to apply your endurance potential to the wall. Make the compromise early in your career and learn those skills. If you want some help programming it, our Boulder Better and Climb 512 proven plans might be just right for you. Links to learn more about those are in the description. And of course, no matter how experienced you are, you just aren't always going to nail it. Sometimes the moves will be too hard and you fall off before you get pumped. Sometimes you'll intend to reach failure, but the moves are easier than you expected and you never really do. That's fine. Adjust. Every session, make adjustments, even if it means just adding in a harder hold from a neighboring boulder or taking a foothold out to make it harder or using a rest that isn't technically on the route to make it a little easier. If the adjustment makes for better training, then do it. Now, I'm sure there are other questions that arise, and please feel free to drop those in the comments and let's talk about it. But overall, remember that the most important thing is that we want to keep these sessions simple enough that we'll show up and actually get them done. You might be 1 or 2% less effective on those sessions that don't quite hit the mark, but you're 100% less effective if you don't show up at all. So keep it simple. Resist the urge to complicate it until the simple version doesn't seem to be working anymore. All right, I'll be back soon to discuss more details about the third and final of our 3 simple sessions. Explore. See you then.